Are European troops about to step onto Ukrainian soil under the shadow of Russian missiles? And if they do, does that lock the world into a new phase of this war? This week, nearly 4 years after Russia's full-scale invasion began, Britain and France quietly crossed a line many thought would never be crossed. With Moscow controlling roughly 1/5 of Ukraine and warning that foreign forces would be legitimate targets, the stakes now stretch far beyond Kyiv, Paris, or London. What's unfolding could redefine deterrence in the 21st century or expose its limits. Because if this move succeeds, Ukraine may finally escape the cycle of invasion and ceasefire. If it fails, Europe risks becoming a direct participant in the largest land war since 1945. And if it escalates, the consequences won't stay contained to Eastern Europe. They will ripple through global energy markets, alliance systems, and fragile regions already on edge. To understand why this moment matters, you have to step back to the war's unresolved core. Russia's conflict with Ukraine did not begin in 2022. It began in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea and the slow-burning war in Donbass. Since then, Moscow has treated Ukraine not as a sovereign neighbor, but as a buffer state whose political alignment must be controlled. The full-scale invasion in February 2022 was meant to settle that question by force. Instead, it triggered a grinding war of attrition that has reshaped Europe's security architecture. By early 2026, the front lines remain largely frozen, but the human and economic costs are staggering. Hundreds of thousands are dead or wounded. Ukrainian cities are struck almost daily. Russia controls most of Luhansk, about 3/4 of Donetsk, and large swathes of the south. Neither side can achieve total victory at an acceptable cost. That deadlock is what made talks unavoidable and what makes them so dangerous. This week in Paris, leaders from the so-called Coalition of the Willing signaled that the post-war phase is being planned even before the war has ended. Britain and France signed a declaration of intent outlining the possible deployment of troops to Ukraine if a peace deal is reached. Not as combat forces advancing the front line, but as a deterrent presence. Military hubs spread across Ukraine, designed to make any future Russian attack far more costly. French officials have openly suggested that thousands of troops could be involved. British leaders emphasized legal frameworks, air and sea security, and rebuilding Ukraine's armed forces. At the same time, allies agreed in principle that the United States would lead monitoring of any ceasefire, likely using satellites, drones, and sensors rather than boots on the ground. This matters because it marks a shift from temporary support to permanent commitment. For years, Western strategy focused on arming Ukraine without crossing certain red lines. No NATO troops, no binding guarantees, no explicit promises of intervention. That ambiguity was intentional. It avoided direct war with Russia. What's happening now is different. These security guarantees are designed to function like a tripwire, even if they stop short of formal NATO membership. Washington's role is especially telling. The United States did not formally sign on to every detail, and language was softened in final drafts. But senior US envoys attended the summit, endorsed the concept of binding security protocols, and emphasized deterrence that would both prevent attacks and respond if deterrence failed. For European leaders, that presence was enough to claim unity with Washington, even as room was left for future American presidents to maneuver. Ukraine's president sees this as a breakthrough, but also as an unfinished one. Monitoring mechanisms remain vague. Financing the Ukrainian army is unresolved. And the most explosive question, territory, remains unanswered. A ceasefire line must be drawn somewhere, and wherever it falls will define Ukraine's borders, at least temporarily. For many Ukrainians, surrendering territory seized by force is emotionally and politically devastating. Yet the alternative is another winter of attritional warfare that Ukraine can endure only at enormous cost. This brings us to the first what-if scenario. What if the deterrence works? In this outcome, a ceasefire holds. European forces deploy in limited numbers, visible enough to raise the cost of renewed invasion, but restrained enough to avoid provocation. The US monitors from a distance, enforcing transparency. Russia, facing economic pressure and a fortified Ukraine, chooses consolidation over escalation. The war freezes, reconstruction begins, and Ukraine becomes a heavily defended frontier state, not at peace but no longer bleeding daily. Now, consider the second scenario. What if deterrence fails? Imagine Russian forces testing the arrangement, probing with cyber attacks, missiles, or deniable strikes near areas where European troops operate. A miscalculation occurs, casualties follow. Suddenly, London and Paris face a decision no Western capital has had to make in decades: whether to escalate militarily against a nuclear-armed adversary. In that moment, ambiguity vanishes, and so does the illusion that this is a regional war. Russia has already signaled its view. Moscow has long rejected any foreign troops on Ukrainian soil, especially from NATO countries. From the Kremlin's perspective, a European-led force entrenches Ukraine within the Western security orbit permanently. That contradicts Russia's core war aims. The absence of Russian endorsement for these talks is not an oversight, it's a warning. The global implications extend far beyond Europe. In South Asia, where borders are contested and ceasefires fragile, this model of post-war guarantees will be studied closely. If Ukraine receives de facto protection without formal alliance membership, other states may seek similar arrangements. In the Middle East, where proxy conflicts thrive on ambiguity, the credibility of deterrence backed by multinational forces could either stabilize flashpoints or provoke adversaries to test limits elsewhere. Economically, markets are watching for permanence. A credible security framework could unlock long-term investment in Ukraine and stabilize European energy planning. A failed one could spike risk premiums globally, disrupt shipping routes, and deepen the fragmentation of the international order. At its core, this moment is about power and belief. Deterrence only works if all sides believe the cost of action outweighs the benefit. Ukraine's allies are betting that visible commitment will prevent future war. Russia is betting that political divisions, fatigue, and fear of escalation will eventually hollow those commitments out. As winter deepens and diplomacy accelerates, the margin for error is shrinking. The outlines of peace are emerging, but so are the outlines of the next confrontation. Watch not just what leaders sign, but what they fund, deploy, and are willing to risk. Because in geopolitics, guarantees only matter when they are tested, and history shows they always are.